Good stories need stakes. There needs to be the chance that bad things can happen to the protagonist in order to keep tension. So when the hero finally overcomes the odds, it feels earned. And there can't just be a chance things go wrong. The writers need to prove the stakes are real, otherwise there is no tension, by allowing some things to go wrong. In The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke Skywalker loses his fight against Darth Vader, his hand is severed. His weapon is lost, and he has to run away. Eventually, however, he gets a kick-ass robot hand and a cooler lightsaber. Cooler because it's actually his that he built as opposed to a hand-me-down from his evil father, but also the green ones are just cooler. In the Season 2 finale of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang loses his fight with Azula and technically dies before being revived by Katara. This puts him in a coma for weeks, and even upon waking, he is weakened and needs time to recover his strength. He learns that he can't save the world and be the Avatar on his own. He needs to allow his friends to help, even if that means that they will be in danger. In Thor Ragnarok, Hela destroys Thor's hammer, completely shattering it to pieces. He has to overcome this obstacle and save his people without his hammer, in the process realizing his power didn't come from his weapon. And then later in another movie, he crafts a cool axe. I don't think many people would claim that those are terribly written stories. I think most people enjoy these stories and find these particular moments interesting. And yet, if you play 5th edition by the rules, none of these circumstances are possible. In 5th edition, Luke wouldn't have had his hand severed, as there aren't really any rules for injuries like that. Sure, the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide does have the lingering injuries chart, but it's an optional rule that I've never actually seen anyone use, and the book doesn't explicitly state the best way to implement it. And the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide just straight up doesn't have it. In 5th edition, Katara would have resurrected Aang, who might have had resurrection sickness for 4 days, but not several weeks. Additionally, since Aang had been dead for less than a minute, she probably would have used Revivify instead, since it uses a lower level spell slot and costs less in material components, in which case he would have had 0 days of resurrection sickness, as the easier and more accessible resurrection spell has 0 downsides. And then after 1 night's rest, he'd be in tip-top shape at full HP. In 5th edition, Hela never would have destroyed Thor's hammer, as there are no specific rules that allow one to target a weapon. Technically, objects have hit points and AC, but that's for like breaking down doors and walls and whatnot, not for targeting the magic item in your opponent's hands. Plus, I think Thor's hammer would technically be an artifact, which are normally invincible, barring certain circumstances. Now, you might be wondering why this video looks different and higher quality and actually shows my face, and that's because my editor is in town, and we're actually working on a pretty big project that he's doing because he's a film student for his capstone project, and he wanted to do a documentary on yours truly and my YouTube channel, so you can expect to see that in May. But while he was in town, he decided to help me out even more so because he's a generous, wonderful human being and wanted to help me film this video. Shout out to Aiden. Dungeons & Dragons is about telling a story. Now, sure, some people do run games that are purely hack and slash dungeon crawlers with minimum to no story. And that is pretty similar to how the game was originally played when Gary Gygax created it. But even then, there is still a story being told. You'd go home from the game shop telling your friends how cool it was when your rogue Matrix dodged the disintegration spell, or you'd fondly remember that time your warrior rolled 2 crits in a row when your party was on its last legs, allowing you to kill the final boss by bashing its head in with a hammer. These are still stories being told by the dice and the collective creativity of the group. It's just rooted more in mechanics as opposed to narration and dialogue. But either way, D&D and most TTRPGs is about telling stories. And long-term consequences can make those stories more interesting. If everything works out perfectly and goes according to plan, it can be boring. When obstacles show up, it forces the party to deal with them, sometimes even spinning off into entirely new adventures. Now, I'm not saying that D&D should be a realistic simulation. It's a heroic fantasy game and it should stay that way. I'm just saying that consequences can make the game interesting. And when I say consequences, I'm not talking about taking damage because that just goes away from a short rest with no lasting repercussions. And I'm not talking about player death or player character death, because once the party is higher than 4th level, that can just be cured in 6 seconds with no lasting repercussions. I'm talking about long-term consequences. How many things in 5th edition can actually do that, assuming you're running everything strictly rules as written? There's a few spells with permanent or long-term effects such as Feeble Mind or Geos, but they're spells, which means they can be dispelled by Dispel Magic, which is a 3rd level spell, meaning the party only needs to be 5th level to have access to it. And a lot of tables start campaigns at level 3, not 1, since the first 2 levels are really just tutorials anyway. So at many tables, the party is only incapable of casting Dispel Magic for the first couple sessions. Now, you might be thinking that, well, Dispel Magic only works on 3rd level spells and below, and on higher level spells you have to succeed a spell check. If you fail the spell check, the Dispel Magic doesn't work. But if you fail, you can just cast it again and again until it succeeds. Now, obviously that taxes spell slots, and if you're in a dungeon that can be a problem, but spells like Feeble Mind and Geos are things you can just wait till you're out of the dungeon and have plenty of time to cast, in which case you'll get it after like 2 or 3 tries, statistically speaking. There are a few curses, but those actually have the same problem as spells, except more so because they're cured by a 2nd level spell, and it always succeeds, so they're even easier to fix. Now, some monster stat blocks have debilitating effects, but most of those specify they go away on a long rest. Now, Intellect Devours can reduce your intelligence to 0, and it doesn't say anything about getting it back, so you need a Greater Restoration spell, which is a 5th level spell and requires 100 gold pieces of diamond dust. So this is definitely more difficult. You need a cleric or druid of at least 9th level, not to mention the diamond dust. However, if you allow the use of rules from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which I don't know why you wouldn't, it's a great supplement, then you can just take the relaxation downtime activity and recover your intelligence after 1 week for no cost. Additionally, if you're running the Intellect Devour stat block from the 2025 Monster Manual, they don't actually reduce your intelligence anymore. The Intellect Devour can no longer devour your intellect. Okay. If you get blasted with a giant hose of acid from a Black Dragon's Breath weapon, your entire body is drenched and you take 50 acid damage, yeah, you're low HP, but that's it. Once you sleep for 6 hours, you're completely fine, back in the same tip-top shape you were in before you ever fought anything. There's no injuries, no scarring, none of your clothes, spell scrolls, books, pouches, or any items in your possession are damaged. After being faced with one of the scariest and most iconic threats in the game, and bathed in sulfuric acid, nothing has changed about your character at all. Maybe they leveled up and got a +2 sword, but that's mechanics, not story. I want fighting a dragon to change me. I want to come out a new person after that horrifying experience. The vampire is an undead creature, a powerful undead creature. It is challenge rating 18 and is oftentimes the big bad evil guy of a campaign such as in Curse of Strahd. They are normally leaders and master manipulators and are nothing a low-level party would ever want to encounter. Being undead, they are animated by negative energy, which is the opposite of positive energy. Positive energy being essentially life energy. It's what souls are made out of, and it's what clerics call upon to cast cure wounds and other healing spells. Negative energy, being the opposite of this, is the antithesis of life and matter. When a vampire strikes you, it isn't just clawing at your flesh. It is draining your very life essence. It is robbing you of your vitality, making you weaker and closer to death as the fundamental energy of your life is stripped away. But don't worry, in 5th edition you can just sleep it off. The ability in 5th edition is called Life Drain, and it reduces your max HP. So even at full health, you are still weaker and closer to dying than before. I honestly think max health reduction is a pretty cool mechanic. But then in the text it says that this reduction lasts until the target finishes a long rest. Which, as you all know, long rest is just you sleeping for the night. Now, let's look at the vampire stat block from 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Instead, it is called Energy Drain, and when it hits you, it drains 2 life energy levels from you. Essentially, it reduces your level by 2. If you were level 10 and a vampire hits you 1 time, you are now level 8. And it is permanent. You need a Restoration or a Wish spell, which both require a level 17 spellcaster, meaning it's unlikely the party can fix it themselves. This is an extremely ball-busting ability, but it terrifies the player, and vampires should be terrifying. Getting afflicted by the vitality-draining ability of an evil, powerful undead creature should be a bad thing, and personally, I think being able to just sleep it off is a little goofy. It takes me longer to get over a cold or a flu than that. Now look, am I saying you should implement Energy Drain in your 5th edition D&D games? Of course not. It would be extraordinarily frustrating and unfun for the player, not to mention the book work you'd have to do to undo levels on your character sheet would take forever. 2nd edition is a very different game from 5th edition. I don't think this ability would translate well, But it's neat, it makes vampires terrifying, and it could lead to interesting story beats, because now they have to find a way to fix it, which of course can lead to cool questline, and isn't that what D&D is all about? Cool quest? Of course, this could derail a story you already have planned. In that case, you could just make the solution easier to obtain while still being thematic. Maybe the player's god cures them because they have a destiny in mind for them, and this is holding them back. Maybe an important NPC finds a way to resolve it as a thank you for the party's help in destroying the vampire, or maybe the vampire had a one-time use magic item in their hoard that fixes it in a thematic and dramatic way. Now, I'd feel like a dick if I just complained throughout this whole video without offering up some homebrew rules that allow more opportunities for long-term consequences. Now, I want to make one thing clear. I don't think not having these is a problem that needs to be fixed. 5th edition D&D is a well-designed game that, for the most part, accomplishes what the designers sought out to accomplish. It's just that what it's trying to do doesn't 100% line up with what I personally want from D&D, which is fine, everyone has different opinions. These rules are just for fun, but in no way do I think they're necessary, nor do I even recommend them. I'm not going to put some clickbait thumbnail saying that I fixed D&D, because D&D isn't broken, and I'm not arrogant enough to think that some YouTuber knows more about game design than a professional game designer. However, homebrewing rules is fun, so I'm just going to give you a couple. I do want to clarify I'm not a professional game designer, and these haven't really been play tested that much. Additionally, most of you will probably hate these, and that's fine, don't use them, do whatever's fun for your table. The point of this video isn't to tell you that you're playing games wrong, it's just to get you to consider if adding some more long-term consequences to your D&D game could make your game more interesting and lead to cool story moments. Maybe you decide it wouldn't, and that's great. I just want you to consider it for a moment to make sure you're running the best game you possibly can. Now, let's get into my rules. The first one is about the life drain ability that many undead have. This is a simple fix, just remove the last sentence that says it only lasts until a long rest. It's permanent now. This might seem harsh, but there's plenty of ways to fix this, the main one being the 5th level spell, Greater Restoration. If no one in the party can cast that, they can go to a temple and pay to have them cast it. According to the Adventurers League, this would normally cost 450 gold pieces. If the player receiving the casting is a cleric or some way a part of the church they went to, then the casting is free and they just need to pay for the material components, which is 100 gold pieces worth of diamond dust. They should be able to cure it, but not necessarily immediately. It's a resource drain. If they don't have the cash, then they either need to make some or pay the church with favors in lieu of gold, both of which require an adventure, or a story. Next up, we have the Lingering Injuries chart. So, this isn't actually a homebrew rule. This is in the Dungeon Master's Guide from 2014, located on page 272. Most people probably don't know that because most people don't actually read the DMG, but if you're DMing, you should read the guide for Dungeon Masters. Anyways, when certain criteria are met, the player rolls on the table and suffers one of these injuries. Most of them are reasonable, being cured by any type of magical healing, or stuff that don't actually have any mechanical disadvantages, they're just aesthetic, like a scar. Of course, some of them are worse than others, but that's up to the players to work around. Now, when do you actually roll on the Lingering Injuries chart? Well, the book provides a few options. When the creature takes a critical hit, when they are reduced to 0 HP, or when they take massive damage, which is whenever they take damage equal to or greater than half their max HP from a single source. Personally, I use the last two. They feel thematic, they make sense, and the second in particular fixes the issue I have with going down to 0 HP having no lasting repercussions. I don't have them roll when they are critically hit, as critical hits honestly happen pretty frequently, and if every dungeon resulted in multiple severed limbs for the party, it would kind of lose its impact and make the campaign feel like a Monty Python sketch. Which maybe you're cool with, but I wanted them to be rare in order to feel more dramatic, but also not get annoying. Now, my last homebrew rule is probably my most controversial one, and it's about items being destroyed. I know most people don't allow items on a player character to ever be destroyed in combat because they think it would feel bad, and that's fine, and if your players really hate that, obviously don't use this, but what I've been experimenting in my campaign is having the chance of large amounts of damage to destroy items. Normally, if they fail a saving throw, one of their items might get destroyed. Now, if they succeed and take half damage, this doesn't happen. There's a lot of ways to handle this. In 2nd edition, there was this whole chart where if a glass item took acid damage, it had this % chance of breaking, whereas if against bludgeoning damage, it had a much higher chance of breaking. And there was this chart with saving throws. I made a modified version for 5th edition, and you can read the rules I have for those in the description. I'm not going to get into the details here, but the idea is if you take a big boom, something might break. Now, maybe the fireball disintegrates all your clothes and now you're naked. Maybe your wizard's acid attack melts the armor on the Death Knight you're fighting, and now they're easier to hit. Maybe the wand of lightning bolts on the evil wizard gets broken, and that results in a wild magic surge, or they get exploded in a ball of lightning. I mean, get creative with it. Magic is weird and unpredictable, and I think the more things you can interact with in combat, the more interesting that combat can become. Of course, that can happen to the players too, and they can lose powerful magic items, and if the magic item on the guy you're fighting gets destroyed, they have one less thing to loot. But you can remedy this by just adding more magic items to the horde. Maybe the potion of Frost Giant strength that's on your barbarian's hip gets broken and seeps into their skin. It gives them the bonus effects of the Frost Giant potion, but it forces them to use it now as opposed to saving it for later. There's a lot of different ways to handle this. You know, AD&D had one way, 3rd edition had another way. I sort of combined them and updated them to 5th edition, and I have those rules in the description if you want to check them out. You can also get a little more abstract about it and just say one item that you think would make sense. For example, if someone's holding a shield up and they get blasted by a dragon's breath weapon, maybe the shield's the only thing that makes the saving throw. You can kind of do whatever you want. Although I know some players don't like it when it comes down to DM fiat because it feels very arbitrary, and they want very specific rules on which items can get affected. In which case, the rules I have in my description does hammer that out. Now, if my rules suck and you hate them, let me know, because I'd like to be a better game designer and I'll take the criticism. Additionally, this type of play is not for every table. It's not for most tables. It's not for probably 90+% of 5th edition players. But I think it's interesting. It can make long-term consequences. It can make combat more interesting. And they did it in every edition up through 3rd edition. So if they did it that long, it can't be that bad, right? Okay, so that's basically everything I have to say. But the gist of it is, just consider maybe adding some long-term consequences to your D&D game. You don't have to do it. You don't have to use my rules. You probably shouldn't use my rules. But just consider if maybe your game would possibly be more interesting if you had a couple more long-term effects going on in there.